Is there anyone here who wants to speak with us?
This story took place at my childhood home in Minnesota. I live in Oklahoma now. My sister and I were home alone and bored, so we decided to play some creepy games. Like the playing card game, which is probably the least deadly game to play in my opinion. Since that didn't pan out any interesting results, my sister and I decided that we wanted to play the Ouija board instead. The only problem with that being that we didn't have one, so we'd have to make one. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a piece of paper and a picture reference, and later we had our board. My sister, Kay, shut all the curtains and blinds in the living room and kitchen since that's where we were playing, while I collected a few candles to light. Once we were settled, I decided that I wanted to record our game with my phone and asked her to wait. Though, fair warning, I do have an Android, so the footage was dark and grainy. I was lamenting my woes when it happened. As I fiddled with my phone to try and get it to brighten, I turned it towards the window, staring at my surroundings through the screen. Then I shifted on the love seat in order to direct the camera down the hall leading to the front door. Now, on the corner right next to the living room was the door to the laundry room. This door was shut, and that is important information because, with the way this thing appeared, it wouldn't have been possible for a human to do. When I panned the camera over, it only took a few seconds before a humanoid head popped out from behind the wall, long dark hair shifting with the movement. I immediately stopped the film and tossed my phone onto the cushion next to me as I began to open curtains, not daring to move over to the light switch, which was right where that thing had appeared. Kay asked what was wrong, and, not wanting to scare her, I waited until we were out of the house before telling her, then letting her watch the video. The scariest part of the interaction was that, outside of the screen of my cell phone, there was nothing there. I'm just thankful that we never actually started playing the game. I can't imagine I would have liked anything it had to say. I actually kept the video and uploaded it to YouTube, so I caught whatever visited us on camera. I honestly probably wouldn't have believed it myself otherwise. A link to the YouTube video is in the description. When I was 17, my friend, George, was attacked by something supernatural right in front of me. My friends and I were very intrigued by Ouija boards towards the end of high school. We spent several nights, over a few months, cramming together and hovering over a planchette. We had a variety of experiences using the Ouija board, most of which you could describe as mildly supernatural or just plain old coincidence. One of the places we would frequent was the garage in George's family home. Like most garages, it was dark, damp and cluttered. George was as intrigued by the Ouija board as we all were. That is, until it started to target George. Over the course of different sittings, we would ask it all kinds of questions like who it was, what it wanted, how many fingers are behind my back. We still weren't convinced it was legit. We had the spirit tell us who they were, and when prompted for what they needed, they replied,
"Kill George."
Needless to say, George was spooked, but in order to save face, he persevered. A sitting following that, we'd asked the same questions. As the conversation developed, a now different spirit had changed its mind and decided that it was the previous spirit and that it still wanted to kill George. This, paired with several events that George had experienced himself in the nights that followed, had driven George away from our little seances. We, however, were still more than happy to tinker around. We were not satisfied yet. On the last night we played with the Ouija board, We set up in George's garage as we usually did. He said that he had no problem with us using it in his garage and in his presence. He just did not want to participate. That night, it was just George, 2 girls and I. We turned out the lights and set up the board. We even lit a candle or 2 for good effect. George and 1 girl sat across from the other girl and I. We were all in coats because it was winter and the garage was poorly insulated. The 3 of us, with our hands on the planchette, had barely even begun when George's coat arm caught on fire. I remember watching him fling his arm around as he tried to smother the flame. I immediately jumped up and turned on the lights. It didn't take long for George to put out the flame. We quickly piled out of the garage into his basement, and after a few moments of panic and confusion, we diverted our attention towards George. He took off his coat and swore his arm was fine. There wasn't a single mark on his skin. We then diverted our attention to the newly charred coat arm. The burn was about the radius of a fist, and it burned deeply through the layers, just shy of the inner layer of cloth. The most startling part was that it was undeniably the shape of a goat's hoof. We hid the coat away for several days. Once we gained the courage, George and I pulled it back out in an attempt to debunk our little experience. After all, there were open flames in the room, and he had a cigarette in his hand. We applied a cigarette directly onto the opposite coat arm several times. We took a lighter to it in another attempt to simulate the same kind of flame. No matter what we tried, we couldn't come close to recreating the hoof-like burn. Over time, I thought that maybe George had decided to stage the whole thing in an effort to deter us from the Ouija board. He certainly had motive. That was 10 years ago. George and I are still great friends. Occasionally, I get confident that I can get him to fess up and press him on the subject. It's been 10 years, and he still has the same response, that he loved that coat and was just as surprised and terrified as we all were. Personally, I don't believe he staged it. I believe that what we experienced was authentic, and my perspective on life has never been the same since. I never believed in Ouija boards until I was in college. My freshman year, my roommate bought one, and we all decided to play with it as a hoax. We planned this whole thing out, and we scared him real bad. Next time we used it, we decided to actually try it and see if it would work. And it did. Too well. We lived in West Philly, next to a cemetery, and on land that used to be a mental asylum for indentured servants and slaves, as well as a farm where a lot of slaves died before abolition. Not to mention all the people who died to violence in West Philly over the years. We got a lot of interesting people at first. A doctor who died from typhoid fever, a slave who was whipped to death, a young man who was shot in the 80s. We were even able to find some of their graves in the cemetery exactly where they told us they'd be. It was like uncovering a key to the past, but then things started to get really bad. We got a child who refused to give us their name or tell us anything about their past. Instead, it kept asking us questions, and when we didn't answer, it would start to spell the answers out for us. Things that none of us would know about each other, or that we never talked about. Stuff like childhood nicknames in foreign languages, and embarrassing moments. We would play for hours, so it had a lot of time to spell out whole paragraphs. And then, it uncovered one of our friends' secrets. They weren't even playing at the time. Some childhood trauma she hadn't told anyone about. She started sobbing and immediately stormed out. We tried to say goodbye to the spirit, but it wouldn't let us. It was vehemently pushing the eye away from the goodbye. We finally hung up, for lack of a better word, and checked on our friend, who then told us the story. We were all dumbfounded. She never played again, but we were hooked. Unfortunately for us, every time we used it after that, we would get the same spirit. Eventually, we uncovered his name, Ubel, and he told us that he wasn't technically a real kid. He died during the pregnancy and killed his mother along with him. She never named him, so he picked his own name. He said we were his first and only friends, and that he loved us and would find a way to be with us. We immediately were freaked out and put the board away for good, since we were convinced Ubel was a demon. Only it wasn't for good. The board would magically appear around our dorm. It would be open and have the eye set to yes. We would hear strange noises at night, footsteps, croaking, rattling. Whenever we talked about anything in the room with the Ouija board, strange things would happen. My roommate had set up these glow-in-the-dark decals in his room. Our other friend said she liked them and that she wanted some. The same one who vowed to never play after it uncovered her secret. That night she went to bed, and when she turned off the light, her ceiling was covered with glowing symbols. She called us over and we all saw it, but when we tried to take photos of it, it wouldn't show up on our camera. After we turned the lights back on, they disappeared and never came back. We had enough, so we decided to play one last time and tell him to stop and leave us alone. He got angry and started saying a string of random numbers and letters. We googled them, convinced it meant something, and the only thing that came up was a radio station. We tuned in on our phone, and it was a religious radio channel, and the host said all the sinners who were listening would face eternal damnation. We were terrified, and then the eye rapidly started spelling out,
See you soon. 3, 2, 1, goodbye.
And as it did that, my friend's stuffed rabbit croaked as if it were a dead creature and flew off the shelf. We ripped him open to see if there was a voice box inside or something to explain it, and there was nothing. We threw the board into the closet and never touched it again for the next 2 years. 2 years later, I came across it again, realizing it must have accidentally ended up in my stuff after we moved out, and I decided to play with it to see what would happen this time, thinking that the last time it was all an elaborate hoax my roommate had cooked up to get back at us for scaring him the first time. This time, it was me and a whole new group of friends. As soon as we ask the first question, it starts spelling out Y-U-B. I never let it finish. I immediately moved it to goodbye and told my friends we were done. I've tried the board several times since then, and every time I get Ubel. No matter who I'm with, people who have never even heard the original story. I'm done with these for life. Ever since playing with it the first time, I've attracted spirits like wildfire. I hesitate in telling this story because I don't want to contribute to the Ouija board stigma. It is in fact a board with letters painted, stamped or stenciled on it, or the way Hasbro makes them, a sticker on pasteboard. It is not a portal or a gateway, and nothing lives inside them. It would be rather tight. Energy feeds off energy, and the board being an inanimate object can't emit its own energy. That comes from those who use the board. I was given my first Ouija board by my grandmother, I think for my 14th birthday. She liked to give odd things for birthdays for some reason. A group of the neighborhood kids were bored and hanging out in my room. We didn't know what we wanted to do, so we just hung out, chatting about whatever kids chat about. There was one girl being snoopy and looking in my closet, and she spotted the board. She came out all excited and asked if we could try it, and I said, yeah, whatever. So two of them sat facing each other, with their fingers on the planchette and started asking questions. Silly questions like, does so-and-so like me? Or, does he have a girlfriend? Well, that didn't end well when the thing pointed to no, backed up a bit and pointed to no a second time. She got upset and decided she didn't want to play anymore. Then it was my turn with someone else. I forget what she asked, but the planchette didn't move, and she became frustrated, so she got up and someone else sat down. This is where things became weird. She asked if she could speak to her grandmother, who had recently passed because she missed her, and it pointed to yes. So the thing starts doing a figure 8. Slow at first, and then gaining momentum. Then it stopped. This girl started to ask if her grandmother was present. It said no, and she just had to ask who we were talking to. Well, that did it. It spelled out devil. A rocking chair across the room started rocking all by itself, real fast. There were screams and a stampede out of my room and out of the house. Luckily, no parent was home at the time. They didn't tell their parents right away, but later that night, they all had nightmares. And they had to tell their parents. Their mothers called my mother, all upset. Apparently, the fathers thought it was funny, but the mothers didn't, and I got in trouble. Even though I wasn't the one who pulled the board out of the closet and said so, but that didn't matter. Grounded. The nightmares weren't all they suffered. Of course, looking back, I think that group exaggerated just a wee bit. They heard things and felt things that scared them so much, they slept in their parents' room at night for a week. I think that pissed the mothers off more than what happened. They were told to stay away from me. Thinking back, we kids were taken advantage of by a prankster spirit who knew exactly what to say to scare kids, and it worked. Other than being grounded and my rocking chair rocking by itself, nothing happened to me. I didn't have any nightmares, see or feel anything. The only nightmare was my mother. Some believe the idiometer is what causes the planchette to move. I think we, being hormonal teens at the time, worked a psychic connection or linked together, causing the chair to rock. Or it really was a trickster. This happened around 2 years ago, so if the details seem scrambled, that's probably why. My friend and I, whom I will refer to as Q, were bored on a Thursday afternoon in January 2019. Naturally, as teenagers do, we decided to create a Ouija board to see if the whole hype around them was true. We assembled the board on a piece of cardboard we found in Q's recycling bin and followed a WikiHow tutorial on how to make a Ouija board. With everything set up, we began the process. We asked the standard questions that everyone asks, i.e., is anyone there, etc. We weren't having much luck, and just as soon as we were about to throw the board away, we finally got a response to our previous question. The planchette, we used a magnifying glass, slowly slid over to yes. I called Q out on his bullshit, but he swears to this day he didn't move the planchette. We kept asking questions, but we were getting very cryptic responses, mostly scrambled letters and such. Also, the planchette was moving very slowly at this time, taking around 5 seconds to transfer between letters and numbers. This all changed when we asked, "Where did you die?" The planchette quickly started rotating between the letters.
XZ, 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 XZ.
Q looked at me, with his face white as a sheet. I asked a question, "How did you die?" And it quickly moved over to a sequence of numbers.
10808080808008.
Starting to get spooked, we closed the session and burned the board. Nothing bad or paranormal has happened to us since that day. I tried to research the numbers and letters a few days after the session, but nothing showed up. This experience always nags my mind every once in a while. And now I've finally decided to hopefully get some answers. Does anyone have any idea what these numbers and letters mean? Okay, I haven't told this story, not even to my mum. This will be long, so I apologize in advance. This happened a long time ago. So my cousins, Kirite, male 14, Gero, male 16, Boni, male 15, Chui, male 14, and myself, female 14, found the board inside a box in my late great-uncle's house. It was also my cousin Gero's idea to play it. It did take some coaxing, but he convinced all of us to go to an empty field close to my nana's house and try and play with it. We had always been warned to never play with anything like this, but we were kids, and well, we liked to seek the thrill of not listening to the adults. Anyway, we did the ritual, or at least what we thought we had to do. We didn't have the internet to look this up, but we had heard from word of mouth from friends what we thought we needed to do, which was place a finger on the tab and move it around as we asked the board a question, and then stop moving when we finished asking the question. Seemed innocent enough. We asked a silly question like what day it was, and we got nothing. The tab didn't move at all. Then Boni asked, "When will I die?" And the tab began to move. We all laughed, thinking either Boni or Chui was moving it. But as it moved across the board, we all felt like an electric shock on our fingertips. It startled me and I moved my hand off because I felt scared. But quickly, Gero told me to put my hand back on, and he called out each letter as the board spelt it out.
Pronto.
Which translates to soon. I remember the feeling around us went from nothing to frightening. I had the urge to back off and run away, but Gero, who could see I was very uncomfortable, reassured me that we were okay, that it was just letting the nervousness get to us. Now, because Boni had asked something that made the tab move, we told him to ask another question. He looked scared, but he finally asked if he was going to be killed. And right away the tab moved to the word yes. I'm not gonna lie, when this happened, he took his hand off the board. I remember all of us just looked at him, and Gero tried to calm him. At this point, Gero said that it could be anyone moving the tab, but deep down, that was the excuse to keep the little piece we were holding on to. Because even as Chui, Karite, and I still had our finger in the tab, we felt something when the tab moved. Boni said he was scared and didn't want to continue, but Gero told him that we had to finish what we started. Boni insisted that we stop, and Gero, like the real smooth talker he is, convinced Boni to keep playing. This time, Karite asked when would Boni be killed. Boni was pissed he asked that. Karite was the jokester amongst us. I think he was trying to lighten the mood, but Boni was on edge at the revelation. Anyway, the board answered 10. Chui then spoke up. He said, "Guys, I feel something holding me in place. I've been trying to lift my finger off since it moved this last time." That's when we all tried to get off the tab and couldn't. That's when Boni and Kirite panicked. They started to scream and Gero tried to keep us all calm. We were held in place by something and it was horrifying. We couldn't move. It was like we froze in place. Gero, again, got my other two cousins to stop breathing hard and yelling. Chui and I were crying. Gero said, "We just need to finish the game, guys. We need to stay level-headed." He spoke calmly, but he was scared like us. Then I asked how we were to finish when we didn't even know how we started. Gero said we would just ask if it was okay to leave. He took a deep breath and asked if we could leave. It answered,
No.
Bonnie was a little more calm, but he said maybe we need to ask one more thing before asking if it would release us. Gero agreed, and he asked who was with us. It spelled out,
Satanas.
which is Satan. When I tell you the fear I felt is something I never ever want to feel again. Once we realized what it said, it went quiet. Mind you, it was broad daylight, but we couldn't hear the wind or anything. It was like time froze on us. And again, cue the waterworks from Chewy, Hirite, and I. We were scared shitless. My cousin Gero then asked Satan, "Can we leave?" And it said
No.
There was no calming us. Then Bonnie began to yell at Gero. He lost his composure and tried again to leave, but couldn't. It was like our legs stopped working for us. Gero took a deep breath and said maybe someone new needs to ask if we can leave. And so Kelite asked, and the board went crazy. The tab went from side to side, our fingertips still attached, and suddenly we were released. We got up and we ran as fast as we could, leaving the board behind. I was sobbing and ran to my nana's house. My cousin Kelite and Chui ran home to their mothers to tell them what happened, while Gero and Bonnie ran to who knows where. I told my nana everything. She was upset, but she had my uncle drive us to where we had left the board, and it was gone. My nana got the boys around and they swore they didn't have it. After digging around in their rooms, the board never showed up. Then my nana called a priest. He blessed us and had a healer pray over charm bracelets for our protection. And we didn't speak of this again. My cousins and I went different paths in life. Kerite became a politician, Gero a lawyer, Chewy an owner of a cab licensing place, and Bonnie, well, he was a Class A criminal. Now I won't give a year or where it happened, but Bonnie was murdered when he was 25 years old. He was one of 8 other victims of a supposed serial killer. He was shot twice in the face while he slept. His death was what reunited my cousins and I, and it left us completely mind-blown. The board had told us Bonnie would be killed, and when Kelite asked the when, it responded with just 10. I still think of this fateful day. Maybe life would have been different if we hadn't played with the board. Maybe Bonnie wouldn't have lived his life so recklessly, waiting for death at his door. I wish we could take it back, but maybe this was fate. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.